Your Honor, the defendant was caught stealing a loaf of bread from the local market. The prosecutor stated coldly. The man only bowed his head. I just needed strength to live one more day. The courtroom chuckled, but the judge didn't. He had just heard the man's name. Who was he? And why did the judge's eyes suddenly fill with tears? Welcome to QH. Let's uncover what really happened. Raymond Doyle, 66, was a fixture in the Brooklyn neighborhood where he'd been homeless for over a decade. Thin and weathered, with a silver beard that hadn't seen proper grooming in years. He carried an old military-style backpack everywhere, faded green canvas with frayed straps that had once been regulation issue. The locals knew him as the quiet one. Unlike other homeless individuals who asked for money or created disturbances, Raymond kept to himself. He collected bottles for recycling, occasionally accepted leftovers from sympathetic restaurant workers, and slept in different doorways to avoid becoming a nuisance to any single business owner. What few people knew was that Raymond had served in the U.S. Army for over 20 years, honorably discharged in 2004. After his wife Helen died from cancer in 2008, a disease the VA hospital had initially misdiagnosed, Raymond spiraled into depression. He rejected help from family, sold their modest apartment, gave the money to his wife's favorite charity, and disappeared into the anonymous streets of New York. Sometimes it's easier to be nobody than somebody who failed the person they loved most, he once told a volunteer at a soup kitchen. On a brutally cold November afternoon, with temperatures dropping below, freezing and snow threatening, Raymond ducked into Morelli's corner market. He'd gone 3 days without eating, and his hands trembled as he slipped a day-old loaf of bread into his coat, while Mr. Russo was helping another customer. But Mr. Russo had installed new security mirrors. Hey, stop right there, he shouted, already reaching for the phone. I'm calling the cops. Raymond didn't run. He simply stood there, the bread still visible in his partially zipped jacket. I just needed strength to live one more day, he said quietly. 2 patrol officers arrived within minutes. The younger one, Officer Barrett, seemed uncomfortable as he placed handcuffs on the elderly man's thin wrists. You really a vet? Jenkins asked, noticing a dog tag chain around Raymond's neck. This ID is pretty worn out, Raymond nodded. I used to be someone useful. Not anymore. Gotta take you in, sir. Store owners pressing charges, Jenkins said apologetically. Says you've been caught shoplifting before. At the precinct, Raymond was processed like any other petty thief. A public defender briefly met with him, but seemed more focused on clearing cases than understanding his client. Raymond was assigned a court date for the following morning, a preliminary hearing where he'd be formally charged. When morning came, Raymond was escorted into Brooklyn's municipal courtroom, still wearing the same clothes from yesterday, now wrinkled from a night in holding. No family members waited in the audience, no character witnesses prepared to vouch for him, just a scattering of lawyers, reporters covering more significant cases, and court employees going through their daily routines. Case number 47. Raymond Doyle, the clerk announced monotonously. The young prosecutor stood adjusting his tie. Your Honor, the defendant was caught stealing a loaf of bread from the local market. Given his prior incidents of petty theft and lack of fixed address, we recommend continued detention until trial. The judge, Honorable Stephen Ellison, a stern man known for his no-nonsense approach and swift judgments, glanced down at the case file, barely acknowledging Raymond's presence. The courtroom attendees had already mentally dismissed the case, just another homeless person cycling through the system. Mr. Grady, how do you plead? Judge Ellison asked, finally looking up. Guilty, Your Honor, Raymond replied softly. I was hungry. Someone in the back row snickered. The judge shot a glare in that direction, before returning his attention to the paperwork. Raymond Edward Grady, former Staff Sergeant, United States Army. Judge Ellison's voice trailed off as he read the identification details. The courtroom fell silent as the judge's expression transformed. His hand gripping the edge of the bench turned white at the knuckle. He stared at Raymond, then back at the file, then at Raymond again. Without explanation, Judge Ellison abruptly stood. The entire courtroom froze in confusion. Judges rarely stand during routine hearings. For several long seconds, he remained silent, his face a mask of controlled emotion. Your Honor, the prosecutor ventured, uncertain what protocol applied when a judge suddenly stood without declaring a recess. Court will take a 15-minute recess, Judge Ellison announced, his voice uncharacteristically rough. The defendant will remain. As the judge exited to his chambers, the courtroom erupted in whispers. Raymond alone remained still, eyes fixed on the floor, either unaware or unconcerned about the unusual turn of events his name had just triggered. What do you think about veterans serving their country only to end up on the streets? Stay with us to discover what made the entire courtroom stand still. In his chambers, Judge Stephen Ellison pulled a worn photo from his desk drawer, a group of military personnel in desert fatigues, standing before a medical tent in Iraq. His hands trembled slightly as he found himself in the picture, 20 years younger, serving as a field medic before pursuing law. And there, standing tall in the back row, was Raymond Doyle. The judge activated his computer and ran a search through the military database he still had access to from his work with Veteran Affairs. Raymond Doyle's service record appeared on screen, confirming what the judge already suspected. Staff Sergeant Raymond Doyle had served 3 tours, 2 in Iraq and 1 in Afghanistan, working in logistics, ensuring supplies reached forward operating bases during the most dangerous phases of both conflicts. He'd received the Bronze Star for valor when his convoy was ambushed. Instead of seeking cover, Raymond had driven a burning supply truck away from wounded personnel, sustaining injuries, but saving 17 lives. The file contained a photograph that had once made the front page of the New York Times. Raymond carrying an injured Afghan child to a medical helicopter during a humanitarian mission. That image had briefly made him a symbol of American compassion amid warfare, before public attention shifted elsewhere. But what truly caught the judge's attention was a mission report from July 2003, classified until recently. During a chaotic evacuation under enemy fire, Raymond had carried an injured medic, Private First Class Stephen Ellison, 2 miles to safety despite sustaining shrapnel wounds himself. "My God," the judge whispered. "It's him." Judge Ellison had spent years trying to locate the man who saved his life, but Raymond had disappeared into civilian life, leaving no forwarding address after his discharge. The judge had never even known his rescuer's full name. Just Grady shouted across the chaos of battle. While the judge processed this discovery, Raymond sat alone in the courtroom, ignored by the bailiff who checked his phone during the recess. For 15 years, Raymond had lived on the society's margins, invisible to the system he once served. After his wife died, Raymond had spiraled into profound grief, compounded by untreated PTSD. The VA hospital's misdiagnosis of Helen's cancer had destroyed his faith in the system. When she passed, he'd walked away from everything: his benefits, his pension, his identity. He couldn't bear the bureaucracy that had failed the person he loved most. For years, local residents had treated him as a nuisance. Teenagers occasionally threw food at him for amusement. Shop owners hosed down sidewalks where he slept. Police moved him along when residents complained. Even other homeless individuals kept their distance from the quiet man who sometimes woke screaming from nightmares. Raymond survived by collecting bottles and cans, earning just enough to buy cough medicine when the winter cold settled in his lungs. He never panhandled, never asked for help. His military training had instilled self-reliance that persisted even as his circumstances deteriorated. On his darkest days, Raymond would take out the photo of Helen he kept wrapped in plastic, protected from the elements. "Almost there, Maggie," he would whisper, "just holding on a little longer." Back in his chambers, Judge Ellison made a series of urgent phone calls, first to the VA office, requesting immediate verification of Raymond's service record, then to James Mason, now a colonel, who had served alongside both men years ago. "Mason, it's Stephen Ellison. I found him. The man who pulled me out at Fallujah. He's in my courtroom right now, homeless, charged with stealing bread." The silence on the other end spoke volumes before Mason responded. "I'm 3 hours away. Don't let him leave." The judge wrote a personal note on official letterhead. Raymond Doyle is not an ordinary homeless man. He is a symbol of loyalty forgotten by the country he served. Judicial ethics prevented him from dismissing the case outright based on personal connection, but nothing would stop him from ensuring justice took a different path than initially planned. As the recess neared its end, the judge's clerk noticed a document on her desk that hadn't been there before: the famous photograph of Raymond with the Afghan child and a handwritten note beneath it. "Some heroes never asked to be remembered." The clerk recognized the handwriting as Colonel Mason's from previous correspondence with the Court on Veteran Affairs. The connection was becoming clear. Raymond Doyle wasn't just any defendant. He was someone whose actions had rippled through many lives, including those who now held power over his fate. When court resumed, Raymond noticed the change immediately. The judge's demeanor had transformed, the professional detachment replaced by something Raymond couldn't quite identify: respect, recognition. Before Raymond could process this shift, the proceedings took an unexpected turn. In light of new information regarding the defendant's background, this court will postpone further proceedings pending a full investigation, Judge Ellison announced. The defendant will be remanded to custody until tomorrow's hearing. The prosecutor looked confused but didn't object. Raymond, accustomed to systems making decisions about him without explanation, simply nodded. As Raymond was led away, Judge Ellison added, "And see that Miss Grady receives a proper meal and medical attention." That evening, a local news blog ran a skeptical headline: "Homeless man claims military hero status. Judge delays sentencing for bread thief." The comments section filled with cynical tales. Another street person making up stories about being a vet. If he really served, why doesn't he get VA benefits instead of stealing? In the county holding facility, Raymond encountered hostility from a young inmate who'd read the article on a contraband phone. "Stolen valor is disgusting, old man," he spat, shoving Raymond against a wall. "My brother died in Afghanistan, while fakes like you use the uniform to get sympathy." Raymond didn't fight back. He simply absorbed the blow, the same way he'd absorbed society's indifference for years. That night he didn't eat the meal provided. He just clutched his military ID tags and Helen's photo, wondering why, after all this time, someone had looked at him and actually seen him. Have you ever witnessed someone being misjudged based solely on appearances? Share that. Someone might need to hear it. The next morning, Raymond was escorted back to the courtroom, unaware that something extraordinary was unfolding. Unlike the previous day's nearly empty gallery, today every seat was filled. News cameras waited outside, forbidden from entering, but eager to capture whatever would follow. Raymond's confusion deepened when he noticed his public defender had been replaced by a distinguished older attorney who introduced himself as Richard Harlow from the Veterans Legal Defense Alliance. "Someone's taken an interest in your case, Mr. Grady," Harlow explained, offering no further details. As Raymond took his seat at the defense table, he heard the courtroom doors open. The audience rose as Judge Ellison entered, but Raymond's attention was drawn to three military officers, in full dress uniforms, who had entered behind the court officers. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Stephen Ellison," the bailiff announced. The proceedings began with unusual formality, the judge's demeanor markedly different from the previous day. "Before we address the charges against Mr. Grady, the court will hear relevant testimony pertaining to the defendant's background, which may influence these proceedings." Raymond stared in confusion as Colonel David Salazar approached the witness stand. Though 20 years older than when Raymond had last seen him, Mason's military bearing remained unmistakable. After being sworn in, Mason addressed the court with practiced precision. "I am Colonel David Salazar, currently stationed at Fort Hamilton. I have known the defendant, Staff Sergeant Raymond Doyle, since our deployment to Iraq in 2000. The colonel turned to face Raymond directly. "This man before you saved the lives of 17 soldiers when our convoy was ambushed near Fallujah. While under heavy fire, he drove a burning fuel truck away from our position, sustaining second-degree burns, but preventing an explosion that would have killed us all." Murmurs spread through the courtroom as Mason continued. Staff Sergeant Grady later carried a wounded medic, a young private first class named Stephen Ellison, 2 miles to safety, despite shrapnel wounds to his own leg. At this revelation, all eyes turned to Judge Ellison, whose professional composure momentarily cracked as he nodded in confirmation. The prosecutor stood, clearly uncomfortable. "Your Honor, while this testimony speaks to the defendant's past character, it doesn't change the fact that he committed theft." "If I may continue," Colonel Mason interrupted, "after reviewing Mr. Grady's file, we've discovered a significant administrative due to a system migration in 2008. Raymond Doyle's pension and benefits were erroneously terminated when he didn't respond to paperwork sent to an outdated address. He has been entitled to approximately $137 per month for the past 15 years, plus medical care for service-related injury. That totals over $246,000 in unpaid benefits." The courtroom fell silent as the implications sank in. Raymond himself looked stunned, his weathered hands gripping the table edge. "Furthermore," Mason added, producing a folder, "we have affidavits from 5 members of your old unit, all attesting to your character and service, including this letter from General Whitaker, who credits you with saving his son during that same ambush." Judge Ellison addressed Raymond directly for the first time. "Mr. Grady, would you please approach the bench?" As Raymond stood uncertainly, the judge continued, "Protocol would typically prevent me from presiding over a case involving someone with whom I have a personal connection. However, I did not recognize you yesterday, and only after reviewing your file did I realize you were the man who saved my life in Iraq." A collective gasp swept through the gallery. The judge removed his glasses, his formal demeanor soft. "I've spent nearly 2 decades trying to locate you, to thank you. I never knew your full name," just Grady shouted across the battlefield. Raymond's voice when he finally spoke was rough from disuse. "I was just doing my job." "You did far more than your job," the judge responded,
and this country has failed to do its job for you. Judge Ellison turned to the prosecutor. In light of these extraordinary circumstances, does the state wish to proceed with charges? The young prosecutor now visibly moved. Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss all charges against Mr. Grady with prejudice. So ordered, the judge responded immediately. Mr. Grady, you are free to go. This court extends its deepest apologies for the miscarriage of justice that has extended far beyond these proceedings. As Raymond stood in shocked silence, the back doors of the courtroom opened again. A woman in her 30s entered, her eyes searching until they found Raymond. She approached slowly, tears streaming down her face. Uncle Raymond, she said. I'm Natalie, Helen's niece. We've been looking for you for years. Raymond's composure finally broke. His shoulders sagged as Natalie embraced him. The first human contact he'd experienced in years that wasn't from police officers, placing him in handcuffs. Outside the courtroom, reporters thrust microphones toward Colonel Mason. This is not just about one veteran, he stated firmly. This is about thousands of Raymond Doyles, who fall through cracks in a system they defended. Today we begin making this right. By afternoon the story had gone viral. News helicopters hovered over the courthouse as Raymond emerged, clean-shaven and wearing donated clothes, flanked by Colonel Mason and Judge Ellison, now recused from the case but present as a private citizen. Russo, the store owner who had pressed charges, pushed through reporters to reach Raymond. I didn't know, he said, visibly shaken. I saw you as just another troublemaker. I'm ashamed now. Raymond simply nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Within 48 hours, a veterans organization established a fund for Raymond that quickly exceeded $200,000 in donations. Social media erupted with similar stories of veterans who had fallen through bureaucratic cracks, prompting the VA to announce a review of terminated benefits cases. In a private moment away from cameras, Judge Ellison finally had the conversation he'd waited 20 years to have. You carried me for 2 miles with shrapnel in your leg, he said quietly. The medics said, you refused treatment until they stabilized me. Raymond shrugged. You were worse off than me. You said something to me that day when I was going in and out of consciousness. You said, just keep breathing, kid. Your story isn't over. Those words kept me alive, kept me fighting. I became a judge because I wanted to continue serving, like you did. Raymond looked at the judge, no longer seeing the authority figure in robes, but the scared young medic from his memories. I'm glad something good came from that day. Not just something good, the judge replied, everything good in my life since then. My career, my family, my chance to make a difference. It all exists because you didn't leave me behind. For the first time in years, Raymond smiled, a genuine expression that reached his eyes. No man left behind. That wasn't just a saying for me. 3 days later, Raymond stood in the judge's chambers wearing a new suit, his military decorations finally displayed on his chest. The Bronze Star, Purple Heart, and other ribbons telling the story of his service. A Veterans Affairs representative formally presented him with his back benefits and an additional settlement for the administrative error. As cameras captured the moment, Raymond spoke publicly for the first time. I don't want anyone's pity. I just hope that those who come after won't be forgotten like I was. The story transformed from a local human interest piece to a national conversation about how America treats its veterans. Legislators cited Raymond's case when introducing bills to reform the benefits system. The photograph of Raymond carrying the Afghan child circulated again, this time alongside the image of him homeless on Brooklyn streets. A powerful juxtaposition that forced uncomfortable questions about national priority. Raymond Doyle, who had been invisible for 15 years, had suddenly become impossible to ignore. What was a moment when you saw justice arrive late, but worth the wait? Share your story to give someone else hope. 6 months later, Raymond moved into Veterans Village, a supportive housing community in Brooklyn. His small apartment, the first place he could call home since Helen's death, contained few possessions but featured a wall dedicated to photograph Helen on their wedding day, his old unit in Iraq, and a new image of him with Judge Ellison at a veterans recognition ceremony. Raymond declined most interview requests, but agreed to speak at local schools about military service and the challenges veterans face upon returning home. His quiet dignity and straightforward manner resonated particularly with troubled teenagers who found in him neither judgment nor condescension, just honest accounts of both heroism and hardship. Each afternoon, Raymond could be found at Prospect Park, sitting on a bench watching children play, sometimes the same bench where he had once slept when the weather was too severe for his usual doorways. Outside the Brooklyn courthouse, a new bronze plaque was installed. Justice is remembering those who were once forgotten. Alongside this inscription stood a relief sculpture depicting Raymond carrying the wounded medic, who would become Judge Ellison, with the American flag as backdrop. During the dedication ceremony, the mayor announced the creation of an annual fund to provide legal assistance, specifically for homeless veterans, named the Grady Initiative. A 10-year-old boy who had often seen Raymond collecting bottles, wrote an essay for his school newspaper. Not everyone in torn clothes is bad. Some people wear memories instead. The essay won a citywide competition, and was read aloud at a city council meeting, addressing homelessness policy. Raymond maintained a friendship with Judge Ellison, occasionally joining his family for Sunday dinner. During one such evening, the judge's son asked Raymond if he was angry about being homeless for so long. Raymond considered the question carefully before answering. I don't need anyone's pity, I just hope those who come after will remember those who came before. On Veterans Day, Raymond stood before a crowd at Fort Hamilton, wearing his dress uniform for the first time in decades. When asked to make remarks, he spoke briefly but powerfully. I once protected this country, now the country has protected me back. His voice strengthened as he continued. Kindness is never too late, it just needs someone patient enough to wait for it. As he stepped down from the podium, the assembled military personnel, from young recruits to aging veterans, rose in silent salute. Raymond straightened his posture, and returned the gesture, his eyes clear and dignified, no longer looking down at the ground but forward toward the future. Raymond's greatest act of valor wasn't on a battlefield, but in enduring a world that forgot him, with a heart that still chose not to give up. The courtroom had only heard his name, but now, it knew his soul. Justice may be delayed, but it is never absent. Don't give up when you're doing what's right. What moment have you stood firm, when the world stood against you? Share it now. Subscribe to QH Incredible Stories to see that truth and justice ultimately prevail. Share this video with someone who needs faith in doing the right thing.